Hi, everyone. Paul Brennan here from Imandra. Thanks for joining us. I've got with me Denis Ignatovich, the co-founder and co-CEO of Imandra. Hi, Denis.
Hi, Paul. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, afternoon for me, morning for Denis. I'm in London. Denis is in sunny Austin. We're going to be doing a series of these videos, but today we're going to start out. First of all, by way of introductions, myself, Paul Brennan, I started my career as an aerospace engineer at Rolls-Royce. I then spent 15 years within the financial markets business working in a regulated function for a company called Goldman Sachs. And then for the last 4 years, I've been with Denis in an automated reasoning company. Denis, over to you.
Thank you. Before Imandra, I was head of a quantitative trading desk at an investment bank, Deutsche Bank in London. Prior to that, I was a quantitative analyst also at Deutsche Bank City.
Thanks, Denis. So look, Denis, I wanted you on the call today because I had an idea. I know it's always interesting when we have new creative thoughts. There's a lot of conversations going on at the moment about people wanting to benefit from the productivity of using AI in their jobs. We come from heavily regulated functions and we understand the drivers to increase the pace, but we know people can't deal with the risks. So there's a lot of conversation in the AI sphere within at least the financial sector that I'm familiar with at the moment, which is around AI safeguards. This example here is a really interesting one. I thought we could act as a firm who would be an acquisitions advisory firm, and they want to build a generic framework for supporting company acquisitions, a framework that is repeatable, safe, and can accommodate a few different scenarios. What do you think?
Absolutely. Just to kind of give more background on the experience of working in a regulated entity, you very quickly realize that very small errors can lead to very big losses, financial, reputational, etc. You can very quickly find yourself in situations where the trades don't match, or a clause was omitted, or something like this. And if you're working at an investment bank, any error that you have, and typically these might happen within the entity, or say when dealing with counterparties, whenever it is in the favor of the customer, they take it, you take the loss. Whenever against you, you also take the loss. So it's a kind of these things are, and given the transaction volumes and lots of kind of stakeholders and different processes that are involved and lots of things, we both have, I think, a lot of this kind of nervous system, it's called muscle memory of, you do something and then you triple check it. And then you walk back and you're like, okay, actually, maybe I was in the zone thinking about something else. Let me check again, because God forbid, this number is off. And very quickly you realize that, the people that make it in that industry have that kind of approach to precision. And moreover, if you are in charge of an organization that is now relying on these tools, AI tools, the last thing you want is to allow someone to use something that can bring in noise and doesn't have enough rigor to just start to kind of create these processes or intervene in them. That would be absolute chaos. I definitely feel for a lot of my former colleagues that are in the industry and how they're grappling with these advances in AI and how they're thinking about how to take advantage of them while at the same time maintaining that control and governance structure that not only is a nice to have and is a good thing to do, but is actually mandated by the governments.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've all got some scar tissue to sort of fall back on, and it keeps us honest. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and show you something. I mentioned before, building an advisory framework for M&A transactions. Now, this example is designed to show you how one could go about doing it. What we're going to do today is, I had a look online. What does a framework look like? What's a term sheet typically structured? I managed to find an example PDF from a firm who had one available on their website. So I'm going to use that to quickly learn what term sheets look like. And then we can start building a framework which is repeatable in Claude. I'm going to use the Claude co-work function. I'll start by putting the PDF in there, and then we can analyze that further. We'll talk about that in more detail. So the first things first, I'm going to show you the term sheet that I found. It's quite interesting. It has some of the key attributes.
And this is a good, I think, representative overall for broker-dealer organization or any type of entity that deals with lots of contracts, which is most of these intermediate firms like investment banks. They all have customizations, there are templates, but there's lots of things where you have to go through and make sure the fine print is understood. and it is explicit. And when things are not clear and precise, you want to make sure they are. And you can't rely on someone kind of, sequentially prompting and saying, hey, are you sure, LLM, that you got everything covered? You have to be very precise in terms of what the obligations are, what the payout structures are, what the risks, everything else.
100%. Here's the term sheet. I won't spend too much time going through it. In fact, I didn't want to spend too much time reading it, right? One of the benefits of using AI is they can read these things for you. The catch is you have to make sure it does it properly. And when you use that information, it's safe. So very quickly, this is a term sheet for a company acquisition, buyer and a seller. It's a complete acquisition. It's not a sort of partial share purchase. You'll see throughout this term sheet, there are typical kind of attributes such as the purchase price, conditions for the purchase. These are things like, the due diligence being completed to a level of satisfaction by the buyer, representations and warranties. So disclosures have to be made by the seller. Those disclosures have to be taken into account by the buyer when performing their due diligence. If things arise after the completion of the transaction, then there can be claims, which takes us to the sort of clawback of the consideration. So the buyer can claw back some of the money they spent by acquiring the company to the seller's original shareholders if something came up after the fact. And that's something we're going to drill into a bit later. Non-compete. So what's interesting about these term sheets, kind of get to the end here, is we ultimately have a complex set of rules, and we're going to be following a process, a sequence of steps. And at each one of those decision points, there are going to be some rules that we have to follow. So this, for me, feels like a framework for an advisory firm that looks like a process flow. And at the different gates of that process flow, there are going to be various rules that have to be satisfied. So when we analyze this, we want to understand, am I going to end up somewhere through this process that I anticipated? And are there any gotchas? So Denis, I hope that sounds like an appropriate sort of problem statement for analysis using more rigorous logical reasoning.
No, 100%. And any of those clauses that are omitted or not taken into consideration could be very expensive. And I think another aspect of using LLMs, which I think even further, merits this discussion, is once people start using LLMs for tasks, it's very easy to become dependent on them. That's another thing. Even this is, I speak from experience. You start using LLMs to write code or something else. Quite often, you get stuck with something. It's very easy to, instead of, even if you know that you can solve the problem yourself or you can look it up and reason, you get into this mindset of, oh, I use LLM for this. So you have this kind of a dependence where it's almost like you have to escape this mental block and say, actually, no, let me actually look myself at what these clauses mean. Once you get in the zone of like, oh, let me just use LLM. Oh, I don't understand this. Let me ask again, etc. You kind of almost remove yourself altogether from the loop. Going back to the original kind of problem statement is, if you are in charge of a regulated entity that wants to give these tools to, let's say, the juniors, the middle management, etc., you have to create the right structure where things like this, where you're not just dependent on the data that the LLM was trained on because the human is no longer in the loop in the right way, etc. You have to make sure everything's pronounced explicit. And what we're doing with in this process is exactly that. So I think maybe the next step is we also just give a bit background. What is Imandra? What does it do?
Yeah, sure. So the first step I'm going to do here is ask Claude to start analyzing the document. But what Claude will be doing, especially as we go into the step 3 that you can see on the screen at the moment, logical analysis with Imandra, is Claude's going to be building a formal model that Imandra itself can analyze. And I'm going to ask Denis a few questions about those steps as we work through them. But importantly, it's going to be a framework that's expressed in code that can be translated into mathematical logic, and that logic can then deduce results or unexpected outcomes. Let's get started. Right, where's Claude? I've prepared this to show people how I've started the process. I've asked Claude just to set up itself so it can take in a PDF, in which case it's the sample term sheet, and analyze it so that we can create a structure. a structure that we'll use for a repeatable framework. In other words, processes that the advisory firm can follow. So let's get going. Claude's going to start analyzing the document now and accessing data types or the key entities within the document, the key rules that we have to follow, and the process steps. So it's asking me what level of expertise I have on this subject. So I'm going to tell it I'm a learner. And again, that's something I've asked Claude to take into account, which is my existing level of knowledge. This is just a user-friendly tip. That's going to take a few minutes. In the interest of time, I'm going to show you the material that I prepared earlier. Okay, so now Claude has analyzed the PDF. We can see that Claude has extracted the key entities within the structure of the document, and these will form the basis for our process flow. As you can see, we've got entities, the buyer, the target company, the seller, which is the shareholders of the company, the concept of what is being sold, which is the shares. Then what Claude's also done is it's extracted from the document. What are the rules? What are the rules for moving through this deal? We call these constraints within Imandra, very similar to a rule in a process, whereby if we have this language expressed in the document with words like must or shall not or in no event, these are conditions that have to be satisfied in order for something to proceed. Denis, do you want to elaborate on that, the way we think about it within Imandra?
Absolutely. So Imandra is an automated logical reasoning engine. So it translates code written in a special language into mathematical logic. And in the process of doing that, even before any kind of more advanced reasoning takes place, it identifies mismatches in, between entities. If you're doing comparisons that don't make any sense, etc., you're basically going from the analog world into, we call it, a digital world of logic, where things have to be very precise and spelled out. And when they are not, it's immediately flagged. Once you get into that world of precise logic, then that's where really a lot of magic starts to happen, where we can start to analyze all of the various scenarios and understand under what conditions certain events can happen and what they cannot. Ultimately, as an old colleague of mine used to say, when you work in these entities, you always want to think about what could possibly go wrong. And this is the mechanism for doing that.
Makes a lot of sense. I'll give you an example of one of the ones here. I quite like this second one down on the left-hand side. It's picked up this constraint. It's a warranty claim disclosure defense. So the document's saying no warranty claims will be permitted in respect of any matter that is fairly disclosed in any disclosure letter or schedule. In other words, there is a period during the deal process when the buyer is performing due diligence. If a claim is disclosed during that period, then a warranty claim cannot be made against it. So think about the process flow. If something happens earlier in the process flow, that precludes a different event from happening further down the process. In fact, Claude's showing us here what the process looks like. We start from the term sheet, buyer's doing the due diligence, we're approving approvals, and then we can see how we could work through this process flow. In addition to showing the process flow, there are certain decision points that Claude's going to take into account as well. Denis, now it's extracted all of these key terms, decision points, constraints, and given me a quick illustration of what the process flow looks like. Claude started building the model in Imandra modeling language so it can be analyzed.
Excellent.
You ready to move to the next step?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So just to recap, we want to build a framework. We started with a PDF document as a template, and we know that we're going to build something that's repeatable, and that's going to be codified. Claude's super helpful because it can read the code. It can also read the document, and it's showing me things as I've worked through this. What we're now going to do is ask Claude to instruct Imandra to analyze 4 key constraints. So we mentioned the constraints up above. It's these types of things here: warranty disclosures, warranty claim, time limit, and so on. So we've set out 4 key rules, constraints in our new model that we've designed with this process that we want to always hold true. These are the safeguards, the safeguards that you can rely upon when you're demonstrating to your line manager, the control function, the lawyers, that this process you have built is robust and it will yield no expected outcomes. So formal analysis. Okay, so what we've performed is what we refer to with Imandra called formal verification. What Imandra is doing with the mathematical model is performing a rigorous mathematical proof that those constraints we're describing will hold true. It's not just asking if it will hold true for a few of the different scenarios that our framework will support, but for every possible scenario. So we've asked Imandra to prove 4 key properties. These ones are about the disclosure defense always working. So disclosed problems that happen early in the process cannot be claimed later, and Imandra was able to prove that. The next one, the time limit defense always works, which means in our model, if somebody tries making a claim greater than 18 months after the deal is closed, they cannot make that claim. So it's a defense mechanism for the sellers, and that has also been proved. The third one is similar. It's about looking for loopholes. But what's really interesting here is that we've had a proof fail. Denis, what does that typically mean when Imandra's refuting a proof attempt?
Well, in fact, this happens most of the time when you start to use this this process, because quite often, things that you again, anytime you're going from analog world of English prose and statistics into world of mathematical logic, you have to make sure that things are precise. And when you're stating, especially, let's say, some condition that you want to be true of the model, quite often, human brain, or let's say statistical one, just is not able to precisely understand what the condition is, etc. And what the mantra does is it actually gives you a counterexample to identify why the property you wish to verify is in fact false.
Thank you. You've teed me up. What's happened here is that, just very quickly read it out, clawback always fully recovers the claims. So this is saying that on the buyer's behalf, if they have to claim against the seller and they have a right to that claim through the clawback mechanism, it will fully recover all of their claims. And Imandra's found a weakness in our design such that this isn't always true. So what has Imandra found? And it's given us, as Denis sort of mentioned earlier, a concrete counterexample that shows why this attempt fails. So what's actually happened, I'm going to just quickly talk through this scenario. The purchase price, $100,000 total. The purchase was performed as a combination of cash and stock. So $30,000 to the seller, and then the balance being shares. So the total recoverable is $80,000. There was a warranty was breached. It describes that here. The damages listed below. Total claim $120,000. So as we go through the clawback calculation, we find that the shortfall in recoverable assets is $40,000. In other words, the clawback mechanism limits the buyer from being able to fully recover what is due from the seller because of the design of this clawback mechanism. So the way forward would be to adjust the model, learn from this design mistake, and adjust for this difference.
And then ultimately, if you are someone who is sitting within this entity that's negotiating this will immediately come back and be identified as a red flag. And I think the natural question is, okay, well, let's say once we're in the world of logic, these things are precise, and when we produce these counterexamples or proofs that the conditions are met, there's always this kind of logical audit trail. What prevents the error happening from translation from English prose into this world? And I think this is where, ultimately, to take advantage of these technologies, there's going to be kind of opportunities for things to be misaligned, etc. But what we are doing here is we're combining the advantages of the statistical AI, which is very good at translation, and the logical AI, which is very good at reasoning. So again, this is not a silver bullet where things cannot go wrong, but it does create this framework where we're taking advantage of the different types of AI for the things that are very good at. And we're not relying on statistical AI that has been trained over data to perform rigorous logical reasoning. This is where the reasoning engine comes in. And it's much easier for the LLM to actually do the translation versus to perform actual reasoning. But yeah, so in the end, we have this setup, and ultimately, the user can understand the process and it's fully transparent and everything is written up and explicitly stated.
That sounds good. And my extra 2 cents is easy to use now, right? With these tools, the power of Claude giving you access to this logic-based reasoning, which 2 years ago was available to the people that had the skills to document these problem sets within a functional programming language. Now Claude can take care of that and make this user experience very seamless, and it allows other people who are non-software engineers, such as myself, from working through these types of problems.
100%. And you always have, in a sense, separation of concerns here as well, because you're not just relying on any single entity to perform this. This is something where you're bringing in logic. And the great thing about this is once you're in this logical world and the results that you get, they're always independently auditable by third-party systems.
So, Denis, thanks for joining me on the call today. I've really enjoyed going through this with you and having your expertise as to how Imandra's working. I hope the people who have watched it have enjoyed the video, got something from it, and realized that, these very powerful tools that can augment your work, take away some of the risks that we know exist when using AI. Have a play and give us a call if you have any questions. Thanks, Denis. And a quick note to the audience, we have the Imandra website link and the CodeLogician links in the show notes. Feel free to check it out. There's a free version as well. So enjoy.
Thank you.